The first lie Duke Nathaniel Hawthorne ever told Evelyn Carter was not spoken with his mouth, but buttoned quietly into the black coat of a servant. 3 days before he was meant to meet his fiancée in the proper manner, with calling cards, family witnesses, polished silver, and all the stiff ceremony expected of a man of his rank, he arrived at Carter House under a borrowed name. Thomas Reed. The name felt plain on his tongue, almost weightless compared to the title that had followed him since boyhood like a shadow with a crown. Snow had begun falling over the Adirondack mountains that afternoon, soft at first, then thick enough to blur the road through the pines. Carter House stood beside frozen Lake Miracrest, its pale columns rising from the white landscape with the weary dignity of a woman who had worn her best dress too many years in a row. From a distance, it looked beautiful. Up close, Nathaniel noticed the cracks. Paint peeling beneath the porch rail. A brass knocker polished only where hands still touched it. Curtains mended along the edges. One upper window dark where glass should have shone. He stepped from the hired wagon with a small trunk in hand, dressed in the plain black livery of temporary household staff. No signet ring. No silver watch chain. No ducal coat. Nothing that would make a person bow before discovering whether he deserved it. That had been the point. Nathaniel Hawthorne did not trust arranged marriages. He trusted documents, contracts, ledgers, and the hard honesty of accounts that either balanced or did not. People, in his experience, performed whatever role advantage required. His advisers had praised Miss Evelyn Carter as gentle, obedient, refined, and perfectly suited to become Duchess of Hawthorne. Perfectly suited. The phrase had displeased him from the first letter. Perfect things were usually arranged for display, and display concealed damage. He had agreed to the engagement because the Carter name was old, the alliance useful, and Hawthorne Court required a duchess before society began treating his solitude as weakness. But before he placed a ring on the hand of a stranger, he wanted to know what remained of her when no duke was in the room. The side door opened before he could knock twice. A thin housemaid looked him over with the practical exhaustion of someone who had too much work and too little time. "You are the new footman from Albany?" she asked. Nathaniel lowered his gaze with just enough humility to be believed. "Thomas Reed, miss. Sent for temporary service." She sighed in relief. "Then come in before the heat escapes. We have little enough of it." The sentence entered him before the hallway did. Carter House was cold. Not brisk with winter elegance, but truly cold, the kind that settled into marble floors and made portraits seem abandoned inside their frames. The entrance hall still attempted grandeur, with its carved staircase and chandelier wrapped in dim crystal, yet half the wall sconces were unlit. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock ticked too loudly. The maid, who introduced herself as Anna, took his trunk and gave him rapid instructions about wood baskets, guest rooms, and keeping out of Mr. Carter's way when he had been drinking brandy. Nathaniel listened without expression. He had entered many great houses. He had never entered one so determined to pretend it was not afraid. Then he saw her. Evelyn Carter came down the staircase carrying a folded blanket in her arms. She was not dressed for receiving company, but in a simple dark blue wool gown with a white collar and sleeves pinned back for work. Her light brown hair had loosened slightly at one temple. She paused when she noticed him, and for one dangerous second Nathaniel forgot the posture of a servant. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a quiet, winterlit way. Because she looked directly at him. Not through him. Not above him. At him. "Anna," she said softly, "has the east room fire been lit for my mother?" "I was just going, miss." Evelyn looked at the thin girl's reddened hands, then at the basket of linens waiting near the wall. "No. Warm yourself first. I will take the blanket." Anna began to protest, but Evelyn shook her head with a small firmness that allowed no drama. Then her eyes returned to Nathaniel. "You must be Thomas. Welcome to Carter House. I am sorry your first sight of us is on such a bitter day." The apology startled him. Ladies apologized for inconvenience to other ladies, to clergymen, to guests they wished to impress. They did not apologize to newly hired footmen for weather and drafty halls. He bowed. "Thank you, Miss Carter." Her gaze lingered briefly on his face, as if she sensed something misplaced there, some accent of command beneath the borrowed stillness. Nathaniel lowered his eyes in time. Evelyn turned toward the east corridor with the blanket gathered against her chest. As she passed the library doors, a man's voice called sharply from within, asking whether the Duke's chamber had been prepared for his official arrival. Evelyn stopped. Only for a breath. Then she answered with calm grace. "It will be ready, Father. Everything will be ready." But Nathaniel heard what her voice tried to hide. Not fear. Not weakness. Weariness. The kind carried alone for so long it had learned good manners. He watched her disappear down the cold corridor toward the sick room, and the first crack opened in his certainty. He had come to inspect a fiancé. Instead, under the name Thomas Reed, he had stepped into a house where the woman he meant to judge was already holding its broken pieces together. Carter House revealed its poverty the way a proud woman reveals illness, not in confession, but in what she tries too carefully to conceal. By morning, Nathaniel had learned the rhythm of the place from below stairs. The kitchen fire was kept low until noon to save coal. The pantry shelves wore their emptiness behind folded linen covers. The silver service displayed in the dining room was incomplete, though every missing piece had been arranged around so cleverly that a guest might not notice until the third glance. 2 footmen had left without receiving their final wages. A housemaid had pawned her winter cloak and still came to work before dawn. Yet the drawing room remained dusted, the front steps swept, and the Carter crest polished on the door as though appearances could warm a house better than flame. Nathaniel carried wood, filled coal scuttles, and listened. Service had always existed around him like weather, necessary and mostly unseen. Now, wearing its plain black coat, he discovered the weight of doors opened quietly, trays held steadily, and tired hands expected to disappear before gratitude arrived. He disliked the lesson because it was deserved. Near 10 o'clock, Anna sent him to the rear passage with a basket of kindling for the east room. He paused outside the half-open door when he heard Evelyn's voice within. Softer than before. "Mother, you must not worry over the Duke's visit." Lady Carter replied in a breath so faint he had to still himself to hear it. "Your father says everything depends upon him." "Father says many things when he is frightened," Evelyn answered, and there was no bitterness in it, only patience worn thin. "Everything will be managed." Nathaniel looked through the narrow opening. The east room had once been lovely, with faded blue wallpaper and windows facing the frozen lake. Now heavy curtains kept out the draught, and a small fire burned as if it had been begged into existence. Lady Carter reclined in a chair near the hearth, pale and delicate beneath a wool shawl. Evelyn knelt beside her, smoothing the blanket over her mother's hands. She moved with the calm competence of someone who had learned tenderness as a duty, not an ornament. When Lady Carter coughed, Evelyn reached at once for a glass of water and held it without fuss, without calling for a maid who was already carrying more than she should. "Your sister needs music lessons," Lady Carter whispered. "Grace has a talent." Evelyn smiled. "Grace needs boots first. Music can wait until spring." "And you, my darling? What do you need?" For the first time, Evelyn's face changed. The composure did not break, but it thinned enough for Nathaniel to see the young woman beneath it. "A full night's sleep, perhaps," she said lightly. "And a household that stops pretending tea can solve arithmetic." Her mother gave a weak laugh, and Evelyn kissed her hand. Nathaniel stepped back before his shadow betrayed him. In the corridor, he stared at the kindling in his arms as though it had accused him. He had expected calculation from his fiancée. Instead he found arithmetic, sacrifice, and a daughter measuring coal against medicine. Later, in the servants' hall, he watched Evelyn enter with a ledger tucked under one arm. The staff rose instinctively, but she motioned them down. "Please do not stand. You have been standing since dawn." Mrs. Bell, the cook, looked uneasy as Evelyn placed several envelopes on the table. "I know the wages are late," Evelyn said. "Not by your fault, miss," the cook murmured. Fault is not always the same as responsibility. Evelyn's voice remained gentle, but the sentence carried steel. I cannot pay all that is owed today. I can pay part, and I will write the remainder in my own hand, with dates. No one who stays in this house will be asked to live on promises alone. One by one, she passed the envelopes out. Nathaniel saw Anna's eyes brighten when she opened hers. It was not enough money. He knew that from the thickness of the paper. But Evelyn watched each person receive it as if their dignity mattered more than the smallness of the sum. When Mrs. Bell protested that Miss Carter should keep something for herself, Evelyn shook her head. I have enough. Nathaniel noticed the cuff of her sleeve, carefully turned to hide a fray. He noticed the absence of jewelry at her throat. He noticed the lie, and how kindly she wore it. By afternoon, the house prepared for an imagined future guest, the Duke who was not supposed to be already inside its walls. Guest sheets were aired in a cold bedroom. The dining room was arranged with more ceremony than abundance. Mr. Arthur Carter strode through the halls giving instructions in a voice too loud for a house with thin walls, correcting servants, demanding polish, asking twice whether the best decanter remained. Evelyn followed behind him quietly, undoing the damage of his panic with small mercies. Lower the lamps in the west parlor, she told Anna. It will look warmer. Move the good chairs nearer the fire. No one will notice the curtains if the candles are placed well. Nathaniel heard it all and understood what Carter House truly was. Not a noble home awaiting rescue by marriage, but a cracked vessel held together by one woman's hands. At dusk, he was sent to carry a tray to the upper landing. As he passed the closed ballroom, he saw Evelyn standing alone inside. Dust covered the chandeliers. The floor, once polished for music, reflected only the last gray light from the lake. She stood in the center of that abandoned room with the ledger pressed to her chest, her head bowed for a single unguarded moment. No audience. No performance. No advantage. Then she straightened, breathed once, and walked out as if sorrow were simply another door she had learned to close quietly. Nathaniel turned away before she could see him. The borrowed name on his coat felt heavier than any title he had ever worn. Nathaniel had come to Carter House to observe Evelyn, but by the second day, he found himself observing the silence around her. It followed her through the corridors like a faithful shadow, settling wherever gratitude should have been. When Mr. Arthur Carter demanded that the hall mirror be polished a third time before the Duke's expected arrival, Evelyn quietly sent the footman to rest and polished the lower glass herself with a soft cloth. When Lady Carter's medicine bottle ran low, Evelyn removed a small silver hairpin from her dressing table and gave it to Anna with instructions to take it to the apothecary in town, saying only that the account must be settled before dark. When Grace Carter complained that her blue ribbon had faded, and she would look provincial before their guest, Evelyn smiled and offered the ribbon from her own sewing box. No one applauded these sacrifices. Most did not even see them. Nathaniel saw too much. The more he watched, the less comfortable his disguise became. It was not the coarse fabric of the livery, or the plain meals taken below stairs that troubled him. It was the ease with which he had expected deceit from a woman who spent her hours protecting people who barely noticed the cost. Near noon, he was sent with Anna to the back pantry to count preserved fruit for the dinner menu. The pantry was narrow and cold, with stone shelves and a window frosted at the corners. Anna stood on a small stool, reading labels from jars while Nathaniel wrote the numbers in a household book. 6 peach preserves, she said. 3 blackberry. 1 cherry. She winced at the last word. Miss Evelyn likes cherry best. Mrs. Bell was saving it for her. Nathaniel dipped the pen. Then it should remain hers. Anna looked at him as if he had spoken nonsense. Nothing remains hers if the house needs it. That is how she is. Before he could answer, Evelyn entered with a folded list in hand. Anna nearly dropped the jar, but Evelyn only laughed softly. Do not look so guilty. I am not here to accuse the peaches. She took the household book from Nathaniel and scanned the columns. Her shoulder brushed close enough for him to catch the faint scent of lavender soap, clean wool, and winter air. He stepped back at once, angry with himself for noticing anything so human while standing inside a lie. Evelyn marked 2 items and returned the book. The cherry may be served tomorrow if the cook insists upon beauty. Anna hesitated. It was meant for you, miss. Then it will still serve me by making the table look less desperate. Evelyn's tone was light, but Nathaniel heard the discipline beneath it. She turned to him. Thomas, would you please help Mrs. Bell bring up the extra candles from the lower cabinet? The west parlor must appear cheerful when His Grace arrives. His Grace. Nathaniel lowered his eyes. Of course, Miss Carter. For a flicker of a moment, Evelyn studied him again. You speak like someone who has been corrected often, she said. Or someone who has corrected others, he thought. Aloud, he answered, I have served in strict houses. Have you? Her gaze sharpened slightly, not suspicious enough to expose him, but enough to remind him she was no fool. Then she gave the smallest nod. Strict houses often confuse obedience with worth. I hope Carter House will not do that while you are here. The words stayed with him through the afternoon. He carried candles. He moved chairs. He stood against walls with the other servants, while Mr. Carter discussed seating arrangements, as if the salvation of the family depended on the angle of a dinner plate. All the while, Nathaniel heard Evelyn's sentence returning like a bell struck softly under water. Obedience with worth. Had he not done exactly that? Had he not agreed to judge her by whether she performed the role of Duchess before knowing the woman beneath the performance? Toward evening, a small disturbance rose near the servants' entrance. A former groom named Peter had come to ask for wages owed from the previous month. Mr. Carter, passing through the rear hall, stiffened with embarrassment, sharpened into anger. This is not the time, he snapped. Return next week. Peter removed his cap, cheeks red from the cold. Sir, my wife is expecting payment from the doctor. I would not ask otherwise. Mr. Carter's face hardened. Evelyn appeared before his temper could grow. She did not contradict her father in front of the man. She simply stepped between the moment, and its shame with practiced grace. Peter, she said, I am sorry you had to come in this weather. Anna, please bring him tea. Father, Mrs. Bell is asking about the dinner wine. Mr. Carter seized the excuse and left, muttering about insolence. Evelyn waited until he was gone, then removed a small purse from her pocket. Nathaniel saw how little weight it had. She counted bills into Peter's hand. Not enough, perhaps, but something real. Peter's eyes lowered. Miss, you should not have to. Evelyn closed his fingers around the money. Nor should you. That is why I am grateful you came. After he left, the hallway emptied until only Nathaniel remained with the coal basket. Evelyn leaned one hand against the wall, and for the first time, he saw how tired she was. Not delicately tired, not prettily sad, but worn down to the bone by dignity maintained without rest. He wanted to say her name. Not Miss Carter. Evelyn. The want startled him more than any discovery yet. Instead, he said in Thomas Reed's plain voice, You are very kind to them. She looked up, almost surprised to be addressed so directly by a servant. No, Thomas. Kindness is when one gives from abundance. I am merely trying to make sure no one else pays for mistakes they did not make. Then she straightened before weakness could become visible. Please take the cold to the east room. My mother feels the cold after sunset. Nathaniel bowed and obeyed. But as he carried the basket through the dim corridor, he understood with a discomfort that settled deep beneath the borrowed coat, Evelyn Carter was not performing goodness. She was spending herself on it. That evening, Carter House dressed itself for hope with the trembling care of a household that could not afford disappointment. Candles were placed where the wallpaper had faded least. The best rugs were moved to cover worn places in the floor. In the dining room, 3 silver pieces were polished until they reflected twice their worth, while the empty spaces around them were hidden beneath folded linen and winter greenery cut from the pines behind the carriage house. Nathaniel watched from the servants' passage as Evelyn moved through it all, correcting nothing harshly, praising every small effort, turning scarcity into arrangement by sheer force of grace. She wore the same dark blue gown, but a narrow lace collar had been added at the throat, and her hair was pinned more carefully than before. It should have made her look prepared for ambition. Instead, it made her look like a young woman placing armor over exhaustion. Shortly after 9 o'clock, Nathaniel was sent to the library with a fresh lamp. The room stood at the back of the house, lined with books whose leather spines had cracked in the dry winter air. One corner smelled faintly of cold ashes. He had just set the lamp on a side table when voices approached the half-closed door. He stepped into the shadow beside a tall cabinet, intending to leave by the servants' entrance once they passed. But Evelyn entered with her younger sister, Grace, and closed the door behind them. Grace was 17, fair-haired and restless, with the frightened impatience of someone old enough to understand ruin but too young to forgive it. "I heard Father speaking to Mr. Vale," Grace said. "He says the Duke will settle everything after the wedding." Evelyn turned down the flame on the lamp with careful fingers. "Father says many things when he needs the future to obey him. But it will it not?" Grace's voice shook. "You will be a duchess. Hawthorne Court has money enough to heat every room in the county. Mother will have doctors. The accounts will stop coming. Anna and Mrs. Bell will be paid." Evelyn stood still for a moment, her hand resting on the edge of the desk. Nathaniel could see only her profile, cut by amber light, calm and unbearably tired. "That is the hope," she said. Grace moved closer. "Do you want to marry him?" The question landed softly, yet it seemed to alter the air in the room. Nathaniel did not breathe. Evelyn looked toward the dark window where snow brushed the glass like fingertips. "Want has become a luxury word in this house. That is not an answer. It is the most honest one I have." Grace's face crumpled with guilt. "You are doing this because of us. Because of Mother. Because of Father's debts." Evelyn turned quickly and took her sister's hands. "Do not make love sound like a burden. I am doing this because a family does not survive by each person saving only herself. But you do not even know him." Evelyn's smile was small, almost invisible. "No. And he does not know me. Perhaps that is kinder for both of us." Nathaniel felt the words pass through him with a quiet force. He had come to prove whether she was worthy of trust, while she had already accepted a life beside a man who might never trouble himself to see her. Grace whispered, "What if he is cruel?" Evelyn's fingers tightened around hers. "Then I will learn the shape of his cruelty, and step around it when I can. What if he hates us when he learns how bad things are?" At that, Evelyn's composure faltered. Only for an instant, but Nathaniel saw it. "I am less afraid of being hated than of being despised," she said. "Hate at least admits the other person exists. Despising someone turns them into a stain on the furniture." Grace began to cry silently, and Evelyn drew her close, stroking her hair, as though she had not just confessed the wound at the center of her own future. "He may think I deceived him," Evelyn continued, voice low. "He may believe I smiled my way into his fortune, that I wore obedience like a pretty ribbon while hiding Father's debts behind my back. But I would rather bear his contempt than watch Mother lose the care she needs, or see you married off in haste to some man who values your dowry more than your mind." Nathaniel closed his eyes. The shadows around him seemed suddenly indecent. Every second he remained hidden became another theft. Grace lifted her head. "Then let me help." "You are helping by staying young a little longer," Evelyn said. "By playing the piano when Mother cannot sleep. By laughing where the house can hear you. Do not underestimate mercy simply because it sounds small." A floorboard shifted beneath Nathaniel's boot. Evelyn turned toward the cabinet. "Who is there?" He stepped out at once, lowering his gaze, the lamp tray held before him like a shield too thin to protect anyone. "Forgive me, Miss Carter. I was leaving the lamp. I did not mean to intrude." Her face had gone pale, but she did not scold him. Grace wiped her eyes quickly and looked away. Evelyn studied him, and in her silence Nathaniel felt a danger greater than exposure. Not that she might discover his name, but that she might see his shame before he had earned the right to confess it. "How much did you hear?" she asked. He could have lied. "A servant overheard." By dawn, Nathaniel no longer felt like a man conducting an investigation. He felt like an intruder in the private chapel of someone else's sacrifice. The truth he had heard in the library had followed him through the servants' stair, into the narrow room assigned to temporary staff, and through every hour of sleep he failed to find. When morning came, gray and windless, the world outside Carter House looked newly sealed beneath snow, while inside, every corridor held the echo of Evelyn's voice. She believed the Duke might despise her. She believed marriage to him might save everyone except herself. And he, the very man she feared, had been standing in the shadows wearing another name. The shame of it sat heavily beneath the coarse black coat he fastened with fingers more careful than usual. At breakfast below stairs, Anna spoke of Miss Carter's kindness in the ordinary tone of one describing weather. Mrs. Bell said Miss Evelyn had asked that the stable boy be given hot broth before he crossed the yard. The old butler, Mr. Hale, muttered that no young lady should be managing a household with a father still living, then looked immediately guilty for having said what everyone knew. Nathaniel listened, silent. He had heard praise before. Society praised beauty, breeding, manners, and useful connections. This was different. These people spoke of Evelyn as one speaks of the last lamp left burning in a house that has forgotten daylight. Near noon, she found him in the west passage arranging firewood beside the empty parlor. For a moment neither spoke. The memory of the library stood between them, fragile and awkward. "Thomas," she said at last, "I hope Grace was not too embarrassed by last night." Nathaniel bowed his head. "I would never speak of it, Miss Carter." "I know." The certainty in her voice unsettled him. "You do?" You looked ashamed of hearing it. Most people only look curious. He had no answer that would not reveal too much. Evelyn glanced toward the parlor where cold sunlight lay over faded upholstery. "I should not have asked you to forget." That was unfair. We often ask impossible things of those with less power because we mistake their silence for consent. The sentence struck him with a force she could not have intended. He, who possessed every power in the house and pretended to possess none, stood corrected by the woman he had come to measure. "You are generous to think of such things," he said. "No. I am practical. A household runs on invisible people. If they are treated as though they have no hearts, the house becomes heartless too." She bent to lift a fallen piece of kindling, but Nathaniel reached it first. Their hands did not touch, yet the small nearness carried more honesty than any formal introduction awaiting them. He placed the wood back in the basket. "You remember the names of all your servants?" She looked at him as if the observation saddened her. "Should that be remarkable? In many houses it is. Then many houses are poorer than they appear." She said it quietly, without judgment, and left him with the words burning colder than blame. That afternoon, Nathaniel watched Evelyn move through Carter House with new eyes and a growing discomfort that bordered on pain. She corrected Anna's arithmetic gently and praised her improvement. She asked Mrs. Bell whether her knee ached in the snow and insisted she sit while peeling apples. She carried letters to her mother and read aloud in the East Room, changing her voice slightly when Grace entered, brightening the air for both of them. To Mr. Carter, she was dutiful. To her mother, tender. To her sister, steady. To the servants, respectful. To herself, almost nothing. The realization angered him, though he had no right to the anger. It would have been easier if Evelyn had been vain, calculating, or eager to become Duchess of Hawthorne. He could have completed his little masquerade with cold satisfaction and returned to his own name untouched. But her goodness had not offered itself as proof. It had simply existed. That made his disguise feel not clever, but small. Near sunset, snow began again, and the house darkened early. Nathaniel was carrying a coal scuttle past the rear sitting room when he saw Evelyn seated at a small desk, writing by one lamp. The door was partly open. He should have kept walking. Instead, he paused when he heard a soft sound, not weeping, but the breath one takes when holding too much inside. On the desk before her lay a draft of a letter addressed to Duke Nathaniel Hawthorne. She had written only 3 lines. "Your Grace, I hope to enter this arrangement with honesty. There are matters concerning my family that I wish to explain before our vows are made. I do not ask for affection, only fairness. Her pen hovered above the page. Then, slowly, she folded the paper and placed it beneath a ledger, unsent. Nathaniel understood why. Fairness was a dangerous thing to request when the other person held the power to deny it. He stepped back into the shadows, and for the first time since arriving, he nearly went to his room to remove the servant's coat and end the deception. But before he could move, Mr. Carter's voice rang from the lower hall, calling for more brandy, more candles, more assurance that tomorrow's reception would impress the Duke. Evelyn rose at once, hiding the letter as if even honesty had to wait upon her father's fear. Nathaniel stood unseen with the coal in his hands and felt the full weight of what he had done. He had wanted to know whether Evelyn Carter could be trusted. Now he knew the sharper question was whether he could ever deserve the trust she had unknowingly given to Thomas Reed. The final day before the reception began with a thaw, and the thaw made Carter House uneasy. Snow slid from the roof in soft white sheets. Water ticked steadily from the eaves. The frozen lake beyond the east windows dulled beneath a skin of mist, and every hallway smelled faintly of damp wool, dying fires, and furniture polish used to persuade the world that nothing was failing. Nathaniel spent the morning carrying crates from the cellar to the pantry, his sleeves dusted with coal and his thoughts fixed on the unsent letter Evelyn had hidden beneath the ledger. He had nearly revealed himself twice. Once when she passed him on the stairs with a tray for her mother, her face pale from another sleepless night. Again when she thanked him for mending a loose hinge on the library door, not as a lady praising a servant, but as one person acknowledging another. Each time, the truth rose in his throat and stopped there, blocked by the same shame that had begun the lie. By afternoon, Carter House received a visitor who made even the servants lower their voices. Mr. Silas Vane arrived in a dark traveling coat, carrying a leather case and the pleased expression of a man who knew exactly where a floorboard would creak before stepping on it. Nathaniel had never seen him before, but he knew the type. Creditors often dressed like gentlemen when they wished their threats to sound like business. Mr. Carter met him in the old wine room, a narrow chamber off the rear hall where empty racks lined the walls like ribs. Nathaniel was sent to bring in a decanter and 2 glasses. He set them down, bowed, and withdrew through the servant's door, but the door did not close fully. A warped frame left a thin gap through which voices carried. He should have left. He did not. Vane spoke first. Tomorrow must proceed without difficulty. If the Duke hesitates, your position becomes unpleasant. Mr. Carter laughed too quickly. His Grace will not hesitate once he sees Evelyn. She is everything men admire when they want peace in a wife. Pretty, obedient, and trained to lower her eyes. Nathaniel's hand tightened around the empty tray. Vane's voice cooled. Beauty does not settle accounts. The notes bear your daughter's signature. If Hawthorne refuses to honor them after marriage, I may be forced to present the matter publicly. Mr. Carter lowered his voice, but not enough. He will honor them. A husband pays to preserve his wife's name. That is the oldest arithmetic in society. She knows? Vane asked. She knows enough to be silent. That is all daughters need to know. The sentence moved through Nathaniel like winter water. For a moment, the old wine room seemed to shrink, its dim shelves and stale air closing around a truth darker than debt. Evelyn had feared being despised for deception, yet the deception had been arranged around her like a trap built from family duty. Nathaniel remained motionless as Mr. Carter continued. The signatures are convincing. You assured me of that. Convincing enough if no one questions them before the wedding, Vane replied. Afterward, it becomes the Duke's embarrassment, not mine. And if Evelyn speaks? She will not. Mr. Carter's answer came at once, careless with confidence. She will think of her mother. She will think of Grace. She always does. That is my daughter's finest weakness. Nathaniel set the tray down silently on a side table because his grip had become too tight to trust. Finest weakness. He thought of Evelyn paying servants from a nearly empty purse, giving Grace ribbons, warming her mother's hands, hiding an honest letter she was too afraid to send. He thought of her asking only for fairness from a man standing 3 rooms away under a false name. The guilt he had carried all morning sharpened into something clearer. Not anger alone. Responsibility. When the men left the wine room, Nathaniel stepped into the back corridor and pressed himself behind a tall linen press until they passed. Vane's polished boots clicked toward the front hall. Mr. Carter followed, speaking of tomorrow's seating, tomorrow's impression, tomorrow's salvation. Neither man saw the servant in the shadows. Neither man understood that the servant was the only person in the house with power enough to ruin their plan. Nathaniel went at once to the servant's stair, then stopped halfway up when he saw Evelyn standing below near the passage to the east room. She had not heard the conversation. Her face showed only the ordinary fatigue of someone bracing for another demand. "Thomas," she said, "are you unwell?" He realized then that he must have looked unlike himself, or unlike the self she knew. "I am well, Miss Carter." "You are very pale." The concern in her voice nearly undid him. After all he had hidden, she still offered kindness first. He bowed his head so she would not see the struggle in his eyes. The cellar air was close. Nothing more. Evelyn studied him for a moment. Then take a few minutes by the kitchen fire before returning to work. No task in this house is worth a person making himself ill. He wanted to laugh at the mercy of it. He wanted to kneel, confess, apologize, and place every ugly document at her feet. Instead, he forced himself to remain Thomas. The hour before sunset was when Carter House looked most honest. Daylight had faded enough to soften the cracks, but not enough for candlelight to flatter them. The long corridor beside the old glass house lay blue with winter shadow, its tall windows filmed with frost where the panes had not been replaced. Beyond them, the ruined conservatory stood half buried in snow, a delicate skeleton of iron ribs and broken glass, holding the last pale light as if it were something too fragile to keep. Nathaniel had been sent to carry split wood from the yard, and the cold had entered his fingers through the thin servant's gloves until they ached around the bundle. He welcomed the pain. It was simple. It asked nothing of his conscience. He had spent the day with Mr. Carter's words moving through him like a hidden draft. The signatures are convincing. She will think of her mother. She always does. Every time Evelyn passed him in the hall, every time she spoke gently to a servant, or paused outside her mother's door to gather strength before entering, Nathaniel felt the truth pressing harder against his silence. He had one more night to remain Thomas Reed. One more night before the Duke arrived in full ceremony, and the house placed Evelyn before him like an offering wrapped in lace and debt. He crossed the glass-house passage with the wood in his arms when one log slipped, struck the floor, and rolled toward the wall. As he bent to retrieve it, the old door to the conservatory opened behind him. Evelyn stood there in a dark cloak, her cheeks colored by the cold, a wicker basket looped over one arm. "Thomas," she said, "you should not be carrying wood without proper gloves." He straightened too quickly. "They are sufficient, Miss Carter." She looked at his hands. "No, they are not." Before he could object, she set down the basket and drew from it a pair of old gray wool gloves, carefully darned across the thumb. "These belonged to my father before he decided fine men should not be seen repairing their own fences." Her voice held no bitterness, only a tired little sadness that made the sentence worse. "Take them." Nathaniel stared at the gloves. "I cannot accept those." "You can if I give them." She stepped closer and placed them on top of the wood bundle. The movement was practical, almost brisk, but the kindness inside it disturbed him more than tenderness would have. People in service are always expected to endure weather as if their hands are made of different flesh. They are not. He could not look away from her face. In the dim corridor, with the pale bones of the glass house behind her, Evelyn seemed less like the polished fiancée society expected and more like the truth of the house itself, worn, graceful, and still standing. "You notice things others do not," he said. She gave a faint smile. "That is because I have spent much of my life hoping not to be overlooked. One learns the shape of invisibility." The words were spoken lightly, but they entered him with the force of confession. Nathaniel thought of Hawthorne Court, of footmen lining corridors, Maids lowering their eyes, gardeners becoming part of the landscape he praised without naming the hands that kept it alive. He had believed himself just because he was not deliberately cruel. Evelyn was teaching him that neglect could be cruelty with clean gloves. A person should not become invisible because they serve in silence, she said, lifting the fallen log and placing it back in his arms. Remember that if you ever work in a grander house than this one. The irony nearly broke him. He almost said, I own one? He almost said, I came here to judge you and found myself judged instead. He almost said, I am not Thomas. But beyond the corridor, voices rose from the front hall, Mr. Carter instructing servants about tomorrow's reception, Grace asking where the new candles had been stored, Anna hurrying across the stones with a tray. The living machinery of Carter House moved around them, and Nathaniel's confession would not simply reveal a name. It would shatter the last small piece Evelyn had before the trap closed. His silence, once selfish, had become more complicated, but not more honorable. Evelyn seemed to sense the struggle without understanding it. Are you certain you are well? She asked. You looked strange yesterday, and stranger now. I am not ill. Then troubled? He exhaled slowly. Yes. Her expression softened. A man may be troubled and still be honest, Thomas. The mercy of it was almost unbearable. Nathaniel lowered his gaze. Not always. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then become honest before trouble teaches you the cost. He looked up sharply, but she had already bent to lift her basket. Inside were dried herbs, thread, and a small jar of salve for her mother's hands. No accusation? No suspicion sharp enough to name him. Only a sentence given freely to someone she believed had less power than she did, and therefore deserved gentleness. She moved toward the east room, then paused. Keep the gloves. I will not have you frostbitten before the Duke arrives tomorrow. The Duke. The words stood between them like a door he had locked from the wrong side. Nathaniel watched her walk away through the blue winter corridor, her cloak brushing the cold stone, her steps steady despite the burden waiting in every room. He put on the gloves at last. They were too small, worn thin at the palms, and warmer than anything he deserved. That night, while Carter House prepared its silver and candles for the man Evelyn had not yet met, Nathaniel sat alone in the servants' room with those gray wool gloves folded before him. He understood then that she had seen him more clearly under a false name than anyone had seen him beneath a title. And the next time she looked at him, he would have to decide whether to remain the lie that comforted his pride, or become the truth that might break her heart. By morning, the thaw had ended, and Carter House shone beneath a hard, pale sky as if winter itself had paused to watch the performance. Every room smelled of beeswax, pine, and carefully hidden worry. The front steps had been swept twice. The dining table wore its best linen, though one corner had been turned to hide a mend. The silver candlesticks stood polished and lonely among simpler pieces that tried their best to look like a set. Evelyn moved through the preparations in a soft gray dress with pearl buttons at the throat, calm enough that only someone who had watched her closely would have seen the strain beneath her eyes. Nathaniel saw it from the servants' passage, wearing the last hour of Thomas Reed like a coat soaked through with guilt. He had left Carter House before dawn, changed at the inn 2 miles away, and returned separately with his own carriage following the formal road. Yet he had come back early through the side entrance for one final task, one final look at the house before stepping into it as the man everyone expected. The gray wool gloves Evelyn had given him rested inside his inner coat pocket, hidden beneath the fine black fabric of the Duke's formal clothes waiting in the carriage. He had no right to keep them. He could not let them go. Near noon, the front bells rang. The Duke of Hawthorne had arrived. Servants hurried into place. Mr. Arthur Carter's voice rose brightly in the hall, all charm and relief. Lady Carter was brought down slowly from the east room, pale but dignified in a chair near the fire. Grace stood beside her, hands clasped too tightly. Evelyn waited at the foot of the staircase. Nathaniel entered through the front door not as Thomas, but as himself, dressed in a black morning coat, white cravat, and the severe composure society mistook for character. The room bowed around him. Mr. Carter almost trembled with welcome. Your Grace, Carter House is honored beyond measure. Nathaniel answered politely, but his eyes had already found Evelyn. She was staring at him. Not with admiration. Not even surprise alone. Recognition moved across her face first, delicate and terrible, followed by a stillness that hurt more than anger. She knew his eyes. She knew the way he held himself when he tried not to reveal thought. She knew, or nearly knew, before any confession had been made. He bowed to her. Miss Carter. Her curtsy was perfect. Your Grace. 2 words. No warmth. No accusation. Only the clean distance of a door closing softly. Mr. Carter noticed nothing. He ushered everyone into the drawing room, where several local guests had gathered to witness the triumph of the alliance. Mr. Silas Vane stood near the mantel with his leather case, pretending to admire a landscape painting. Nathaniel saw him. Vane saw the Duke and smiled like a man counting money already spent. Tea was served. Compliments were exchanged. Mr. Carter spoke too much of family honor, too loudly of old names joined together, too eagerly of trust. Evelyn sat across from Nathaniel, hands folded in her lap, her face composed in a way that reminded him painfully of the night in the library. At last, Mr. Carter rose with a glass in hand. Before final arrangements proceed, Your Grace, there is a small matter of household obligation best handled with noble understanding. Evelyn's head turned sharply. Father. He lifted one hand, silencing her with a smile meant for witnesses. My daughter is too modest to speak of these burdens, but she has long been aware of certain notes attached to her name. Youth is sometimes imprudent, yet marriage provides the opportunity to resolve such matters with dignity. The room altered. Slowly. Subtly. Like ice cracking beneath a polished floor. Grace went white. Lady Carter's hand fluttered against her shawl. Evelyn rose. I have signed no such notes knowingly. Mr. Carter sighed, pained and theatrical. My dear, this is not the time for delicate denials. Mr. Vane stepped forward with his leather case. Documentation exists, Miss Carter. It would be unfortunate for everyone if His Grace learned of it from less friendly mouths. Every gaze turned toward Evelyn. The same society that praised gentleness now waited to see whether shame would make her small. Nathaniel felt the last thread of Thomas Reed burn away inside him. Evelyn looked at him then, and whatever recognition she had carried hardened into certainty. You, she whispered. The room did not hear it. He did. Her eyes asked the question his mouth had feared. How much of me did you steal before you came as yourself? Nathaniel stood. Mr. Carter began to smile, expecting rescue in the form of payment. Vane adjusted his cuffs. Evelyn did not move. Nathaniel reached into his coat, not for a check, but for the folded copy of the notes he had obtained at dawn, and the memorandum his own solicitor had prepared after he sent word through the night. This matter will not be settled by my purse, he said. His voice was quiet, but the drawing room fell silent at once. Mr. Carter blinked. Your Grace? Nathaniel placed the papers on the table. These signatures require examination. These debts require witnesses. And before any person in this room suggests Miss Carter deceived me, I should make clear that I arrived at Carter House 3 days ago under another name. Evelyn closed her eyes for one wounded second. Grace gasped. Mr. Carter's face strained of its confidence. Nathaniel looked at Evelyn, and the shame in him was finally bare enough to deserve its name. I was Thomas Reed, he said. And I heard enough to know that Miss Carter is not the architect of this deception, but its intended sacrifice. Nathaniel's confession did not soften the room. It divided it. On one side stood every polished habit that had brought Carter House to this moment, Mr. Carter's practiced charm, Mr. Vane's careful papers, the guest's appetite for scandal disguised as concern. On the other stood Evelyn, pale and motionless beside her mother's chair, learning in front of witnesses that the servant she had treated with kindness had been the Duke she feared all along. Her hurt was quiet, and because it was quiet, Nathaniel felt it more deeply than any accusation. Mr. Carter recovered first, because men skilled in excuses often mistake speed for innocence. Your Grace, surely this theatrical misunderstanding can be discussed privately. Nathaniel turned toward him. No. Privacy has served this matter too well already. Mr. Vane closed his leather case halfway. These are legal obligations. Then they will be examined legally, Nathaniel said. Not socially. Not over tea. Not with a young woman's reputation placed on the table as collateral. He unfolded the memorandum from his solicitor and laid it beside the notes. The signatures attributed to Miss Carter were collected before the witnesses now named on these documents were even present in the county. One witness was in Boston that week. Another has been dead for 2 years. A silence followed, sharp enough to make the ticking clock sound impertinent. Grace covered her mouth. Lady Carter shut her eyes as if grief had finally become too heavy to hold upright. Evelyn looked at the papers, then at her father, but the question in her face was worse than anger. It was the face of a daughter discovering how cheaply her trust had been spent. Father, she said. One word. Mr. Carter seemed to age beneath it. I did what was necessary. For whom? Evelyn asked. Her voice did not rise. That was what made the room listen. For this house? For Mother? For Grace? Or for the pride that would rather sell my name than admit you were afraid? He had no answer clean enough to speak. Mr. Vane attempted to step toward the door, but Nathaniel's coachman, summoned quietly before the reception, appeared in the entrance with the local magistrate beside him. No one gasped. The scene was too cold for melodrama. It unfolded with the grave order of truth arriving late, but properly dressed. Mr. Vane, the magistrate said, I believe we should review those papers elsewhere. Mr. Vane's smile failed completely. Mr. Carter lowered himself into a chair, not with grandeur, but with the dull exhaustion of a man whose performance had ended. Nathaniel did not look triumphant. Triumph would have been vulgar in the presence of Evelyn's pain. He turned to the guests instead. Miss Carter did not deceive me. She did not conceal these debts from ambition. She wrote to explain them before this reception, though fear and duty kept the letter unsent. I know because I saw it. Because I was here when I should not have been. He faced Evelyn then, and every title he owned felt suddenly insufficient. I wronged you before I defended you. I came into your home under a false name because I did not trust the woman chosen for me. Instead, I found a woman everyone else had trusted too much with their burdens. Evelyn's eyes shone, but no tear fell. You heard my private words. Yes. And used them now. To protect you, he said, then stopped himself. Even protection can become another theft if it takes away your choice. So I will say only this. I heard enough to know your honor was never in question. Mine was. The room held its breath around them. Evelyn glanced toward her mother, whose trembling hand reached for hers. Grace stood close on the other side, no longer a child asking to be saved, but a sister witnessing what saving had cost. Then Evelyn looked back at Nathaniel. You were kind as Thomas, she said softly. At times. He bowed his head. Thomas borrowed kindness from the man I should have been. And the Duke? The question was gentle enough to cut. Nathaniel reached into his coat and removed the gray wool gloves, folded with care. He placed them on the table between them, not as a token to keep, but as a truth returned. The Duke is only beginning to learn what Thomas was given freely. Evelyn looked at the gloves for a long moment. Then she picked them up and held them against her palm. I do not know whether I can forgive the disguise. I would not ask you to decide today. Good. Because I will not. A faint, wounded dignity steadied her voice. If this engagement continues, it will not continue because you rescued me in a drawing room. It will continue only if honesty can stand in daylight longer than it hid in corridors. Nathaniel bowed, deeply enough that several guests shifted in discomfort. Then I will stand where you permit me, Miss Carter. Not where my title assumes I belong. By evening, Mr. Vane's documents had been taken for examination, Mr. Carter's accounts were sealed, and Carter House, for the first time in years, seemed poor without pretending otherwise. That honesty made it strangely warmer. The guests left in subdued clusters. Lady Carter was returned to the East Room. Grace stayed beside Evelyn, their hands linked. Nathaniel departed last. At the front steps, snow began to fall again over Lake Miracrest, softening the road but not erasing it. Evelyn stood beneath the porch lantern with the gray gloves in her hands. He paused at the carriage door. "I will send my solicitor tomorrow," he said. "Not to command, but to assist, if you wish it." Evelyn nodded.